Welcome to the 12th Annual Naples International Film Festival. My name is David Filner, and I'm the Executive Vice President, Artistic Operations at Artis Naples. And on behalf of everyone at Artis Naples and the Naples International Film Festival, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this very special TalkBack Q&A about the documentary feature film, Fish and Men. We'd also like to thank our TalkBack Q&A sponsors, Saran and Stan Crosshour, for their support. Now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce the director and co-director, co-writer, and co-producer of this film, Darby Duffin. Darby, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And would you like to introduce the two other guests from the film?
Absolutely. So we have Richard Burgess today. Richard is one of the fishermen that we feature from Gloucester in our film. And Valentine Thomas, who is a sustainable seafood advocate and spearfisher woman extraordinaire.
Well, welcome to all of you. Darby, thanks so much for this. It's a really important, thought-provoking film. I certainly learned a lot about seafood that I had no idea about. Can you start with, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this film? Do you have a connection with fishing, or was it, how did the story get on your radar?
No connection with fishing. I was living in coastal New England in a small New Hampshire town, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, about an hour north of Boston. And it was kind of two things that happened. One, I met someone who was involved in the fishery, whose husband was a fisherman. It was just one of these chance meetings, and I got to talk with her, and we just discussed fishing, the current state of the industry there. And I was probing her with questions because I had no idea the state was. Fishery was in such disarray, and so it just piqued my interest in what was happening. And I think at the time, this was about 10 years ago, the industry was going through this transition from catch shares or from days of sea to catch shares, and it was having a big impact on a lot of fishermen. So I kind of put two and two together because as a seafood consumer, I had gone to my local seafood market, and I'm looking for local fish, local cod, local haddock, what have you. And, all that was presented in front of me in the seafood base was mostly imported cod, imported haddock. And it just didn't make any sense, right? So it just, it's just one of those things that just stuck in my mind. And I was thinking, how is it that I'm seeing cod from Iceland and Norway that's, $10.99 a pound, and local cod, if it's there, it's $14.99 a pound. It just didn't make any sense to me. So I knew there was a story there, and it was just probably a period of like a couple of years that I just was researching everything I could, reading what I could. There was, a fair amount of regular publicity talking about the industry's demise, local newspapers like the Boston Globe, and at the same time, it was maybe around 2013 or so that, we began to see some of these issues come up around imported seafood, like some of the mislabeling issues that the Oceana study brought out. We didn't touch that in our film, but it was beginning to become apparent that this, imported seafood, which had sort of stayed behind the radar, was really having an impact in a negative way. And so for me, once I found out a couple of these mind-blowing things, like 91%, I knew that I was seeing quite a bit of seafood that was imported, but to learn that this vast amount of 91% of seafood that was imported, it blew me away, right? And so that was really what began to say, like, I know there was a deeper story here that's not being told, one that I kept looking for answers about, why is no one talking about the negative effects of the imported seafood that we're getting, this deluge, and not connecting the dots, because that's what just made sense to me. I'm like, talking to these fishermen in Gloucester who are struggling to survive. Meanwhile, the cod's not stopping, but these guys can't catch it. So that was kind of how it started. I was looking to start a documentary around early 2014. I had a few different ideas. I had three ideas. I pitched them to my wife and my mom, and they were both like, do the fishing one. So that's kind of how it started. And I pitched it at a documentary film contest, and it did very well out of like 5,000 or 6,000. So it was at that time I was like, this is a big project. I had no idea at the time how long it was going to take me. At the end of the day, it ended up being 6 years. But I recruited Adam, who I'd known for a while, and I knew was probably on the lookout to work in a project like this. So met him for lunch. I pitched it to him, and he's like, "Yeah, let's get started." So that's kind of how it started, and that was probably April 2014, and we, finished the film about 5 years later.
Wow, I mean, the scope of the film, both in time and there's stories starting pretty early back, and that's actually one of the questions that I had. It's interesting that when you actually started, and you were filming through 2019?
We filmed pretty heavy early on in 2000 and let's see, 2013. I think I'm trying to think, was it 13 or 14? I think it was 13, Rich. Yeah, I think it was 13. Yeah. And so Rich was one of the first interviews that we did. I think the first thing I shot by myself was the Boston Fish Beer Rally. So you see that later in the film, cut in and out. But that was the first thing that I shot. And then we lined up a series of interviews. Richard was one of them. And so we shot heavy from like 2013, 14. And then we began to try to assemble the film around 2015. We went through a series of editors off and on, as probably a lot of different doc directors can relate to. This was, Adam and I both had full-time jobs, so we're shooting this on the weekend, taking days off, using vacation time, whatever we could. And it was just this on again, off again project. I mean, we were always into it, whatever we were doing to some degree, but it was a period. So I said, so probably more close to 6 years, from like 2013 to 19. Yeah.
So Gloucester is obviously really almost a framing thing of the film and the story. How quickly did you sort of focus on Gloucester, and then to Richard? I mean, how did you find Richard, and Richard, what was your experience with the film? So
yeah, so I'll just answer your first question, and Richard can jump in. Well, number one, there's a lot to be said about logistics when it comes to doc filmmaking, right? So I'm in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Gloucester's an hour away. Gloucester's also, the oldest port in America. People that saw A Perfect Storm remember it. It's a known place. It's not a random one, and it's just one that was always really built around codfish, right? So, you have to pick somewhere to start, and you have to manage that story in such a way, and the cod story is such one that sort of coincides with the story of this country, right? It goes back centuries, and so the idea of the iconic fisherman, you just can't find a better place than to start with Gloucester. And at the same time, there was a story to be told, because there was just this dramatic swing that had been taking place over the prior decade or two in terms of, how the industry had been faring. But to answer your question, like, how did I find Richard? So again, I'd done a lot of research. I reached out to Richard. I think I cold called him. I got his number somehow. And, I didn't know what to expect. I knew that, just calling on fishermen out of the blue and saying, hey, you want to be in a documentary, probably isn't going to go too well. There have been other films that have been shot. They're used to seeing the media down there. So I think, I was sort of cautious that there was going to be a bit of caution and suspicion. But Richard was, we talked for a bit, and I kind of told him the goals with wanting to tell this important story. So he invited me down, and that's how I got started.
Yeah, very good. I can't remember the day, but it turned out to be epic working with Darby. It's been really it's been fun, and it's great that someone actually wanted to listen to me and hear the story that's been going on in the past with the fishermen here, that we've been targeted as being the bad guy. When I was younger, I started fishing in the Bay of Fundy with my uncles in the late 50s, and I bought my first boat, and I got my first permit in 1971. Bought my first boat, I think, in 1973, and so on and so forth. But fishermen used to be not a hero, but we used to be looked up to. Until the past 10 years or 15 years. We've been portrayed as being the rapers of the ocean, and it's just not true. The National Marine Fisheries Service has done us a great injustice. They've tried to just eliminate the small boat fishery in this region, and I tried to explain that to people in the media around Boston, the Boston Globe, the Herald at the time, or whatever it was, and I just had to give it a shot with Darby and Adam and see if they'd actually listen to me. And they did, and it worked out fine.
So were you, I guess, actively, I mean, obviously it's your livelihood, so you care very deeply about it. But what you just said about contacting other media, were you actively looking for support and media support to be getting out your story, or was it kind of a happenstance that it was a story you wanted to tell and Darby just happened to sort of call you up and say, hey, can you tell me your story?
I think it was more of a happenstance. I actually ran the Gulf of Maine Fishermen's Alliance, one of the fishing groups back in the 80s. And I went to meeting after meeting with the National Marine Fisheries Service and the councils, the New England Fishery Management Councils, trying to just support our industry. And back then, fishermen hated each other. You didn't talk. You didn't want to be in the same room with each other. And we fought for years to get a group together of small boat, big boat fishermen to sit down and discuss what's happening, because the government's against us. And it took a lot, it really took a lot. And no one would listen to us, really. I mean, the fishery service would say there's no fish left. We said, there's all kinds of fish. We can go catch our yearly quota in 2 days. Mm-hmm. And it was very frustrating. It's still very frustrating.
Yeah.
But Darby and Adam, they came to me and said, tell us a story. And I told them the truth, and they took it from there.
So Darby, the story, although there's the Gloucester, the fisherman there is obviously a huge part of the story, you do a really wonderful job of giving a very multi-dimensional look at the whole industry. Can you talk a little bit about how you found all the people that you were talking to and what all the different, perspectives on the industry provided to you as you were making the film?
Yeah, so one thing I was certain on from the get-go is we didn't want to make a real advocacy-heavy film. There's other documentaries that are out there. Perhaps you've seen some of them, that claim all the fish in the ocean is going to be fished out by 2030. And as Richard was saying, what I had seen and what I knew to be out there in the landscape of documentaries was sort of that similar vein, that similar themes to that, as Richard said, fishermen were vilified, and there was not a holistic perspective about this very complex issue where there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of different perspectives. So that was really sort of, inherent in the approach was, well, we're going to include everybody's voice in this, the regulators, the environmentalists, the industry, and we want to include those voices and portray them in a way that it is authentic and fair and gives people, obviously we're making choices editorially about when and where and how much time we give them, but we wanted that to look like a not more observational, right? So, again, I knew who the main players were, and certainly after talking to people like Richard, Russell, and Spatia, and Angela, and getting to know Gloucester a little bit more, I just had a better sense of who those people were on all sides. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we had access, to them. I mean, including guys like John Bullard, who, could be a guy that, quite honestly, we could have vilified him, and we could have taken that and made it very, very much more just heavy on a fisherman's perspective and more about the damage that had been done. And we, what had been done was done. And we wanted to make the film a little bit more evergreen too, where, we were not just going to focus on the problems, we were going to focus on the solutions. Mm-hmm. That was probably the hardest part because, quite frankly, there aren't a whole lot of solutions that are out there. I mean, there's still challenges in the industry. Richard can talk about it. Valentine can talk about what some of those are as well. But we knew that as filmmakers, we had to offer a road, right? And so I think from my perspective, early on, I wanted to tell the Gloucester story because that's really getting you into the life of a fisherman. And we take you right into what that experience was like. You see Russell Sherman, we count his tale about his near-death experience when the boat sinks. There's probably is not a whole lot more visceral way you can tell how dangerous that job is than that, right? So you should give people, an appreciation immediately for what's at stake and what the risks that they incur, but also this global picture that, again, when I first pitched this, I pitched this as food Inc. means deadliest catch, and then maybe like a little chef's table to it, right? Because that ultimately ended up being where we wanted to go with solutions was, knowing there wasn't really that much silver bullets. We did see that we were looking at CSAs and, CSFs. So for your audience, when it comes to like the farm to table movement, that it's been around for 20 years or so, that, this idea of farm to table and these ideas were beginning to develop around fisheries, around seafood, but there was really small scale, and although they were successful, they just weren't having a big impact. So when we found Dock to Dish, that was really a scaled idea to it, and it connected chefs who we always thought as, these are the important change agents in our culture, that because ultimately we were pointing the film like back at the consumer, because if there's any goal to this, I hope it is raising awareness for consumers about wondering and wanting them to know and be more inquisitive about where the seafood comes from. And then, hopefully offering them some alternatives and solutions as to where to find it. So.
Well, I have to say that watching the film, I mean, personally, the fact that it felt very even-handed about that you were being as fair as possible, that it makes the story, I think, even that more compelling to realize the mistakes that have been made, the problems that have happened, and to not feel like it's just only one perspective. So I appreciate that. In terms of the solutions, you had mentioned that there are no silver bullets. I'd love to get, especially perspective from Valentine and Richard, about, what are the things that you think, if you could control the world, snap your fingers and make changes to the way the seafood industry is right now, what are some of the things that you would suggest in a perfect world? And then maybe also what are some more realistic things that you can be doing, that we can be doing or thinking about?
I think it's a hard question to answer, because efforts need to be made not only all the way across the supply chain, but also when it comes to consumers. Everybody has a small role to play in order to make a big difference. And then again, which I really like about the documentary Fish and Man, is that it was one of the first time that was actually seeing somebody focusing on the social and economical aspect of sustainability. And then sadly, when it comes to sustainability of seafood, or a lot of other things for that matter, very often it's only spoke about in an environmental way and nothing else than that. But for various reasons, by example, you cannot say people that live on $2 a day that they need to be sustainable. They need to survive, they need to eat. You can't say that. And then again, you can't just say people like Richard, well, just do something else with your life. Or so there's really something behind it. There's an anthropologic side to this that really needs to be addressed. And we need to sadly put emotions aside, or put them in different things also, to be able to find solutions. Otherwise, if the only thing we're thinking is poor fishies and poor dolphins, and I'm sorry, there's poor Richard also.
It's kind of strange. My wife keeps saying to me when we do these Zoom calls here, I'm still very emotional over it, and I'm getting old. I should be retiring, but I'm not. I'm still going full speed. But we get back to when Darby first went to the Boston State Fish Pier. One of his first times seeing all the fishermen together and what have you. We organized that. Our fishing group organized that meeting to let all the fishermen voice their opinions to the politicians at the time. And we asked John Bullard, who was the director of the Fishery Service, not to show up. And John, being 7'5" or whatever it was, came with everybody from his office. He showed up and tried to take the show over. And that's just the arrogance of the Fishery Service. They want to control everybody. They want to control everything. And like I've said, that when Pat Kirkle came in and took Andy Rosenberg's job over, she said to me, I went up and approached her. I said, I'm Richard Burgess. I'm running the fishing organization. Explain to me what's going on. And she said, my job is to eliminate the small boat fishery. And that's just been hell-bent ever since. It's terrible. And basically that's what's happened. There's very, very, very few small boats in existence today.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that is it just that the government oversight that's been the problem, or are there other factors involved in it? Is it?
Well, they've said that, you know, we can manage 8 or 10 or 12 big boats better than we can manage 400 small mom and pop guys. And you know, there's plenty of fish. They're just not giving us the quotas to catch them, and it's right now there's very few guys fishing here.
Yeah. Has it, when you've been out there with you know, fishing now, and you're it just seems to me very difficult to be able to predict, to say how many fish are out in an entire ocean when like the modeling for that, I think there was, you know, the discussion about the modeling and how the modeling overnight changed and said you went from, you know, you're going to have lots of fish to where it's crashing just because the modeling is different. Do you find that frustrating, that there's sort of third parties in an office somewhere who are dictating about what's actually you're seeing out on the water?
It's extremely frustrating. You know, the codfish is the biggest enemy right now. Everybody's trying to stay away from codfish, which the guys are doing a good job of it. The haddock have come back. There's the small boat draggers, which is only a handful in Gloucester, have done extremely well with the haddock now. It's a beautiful fresh fish, and get away from the frozen stuff from China. Please buy, you know, Gloucester fresh haddock. But sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I thought you were done. Sorry about that. I just have a quick question for you. Do you feel that actually the government is being unfair with quotas when it comes to smaller fisheries, opposite to the bigger ones?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. They've been trying to eliminate the small boat fishery for a long time. Absolutely.
That's crazy.
What about Darby? One of the, I think, pivotal things is you go to Norway, right, and check out the fishing experience there. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah.
Both from a sort of a production standpoint, and then we can talk about what that means and how the differences of the way they deal with seafood there versus the U.S.
Yeah. So you know, we you know, when you strip it all away, all the arguments and the different positions, you know, at the end of the day, from my point of view, it all comes down to the science, right? We're just talking about it. It comes down to counting fish, and it comes down to those assessments, and these are the rules that these guys have to live by. And, you know, we wanted to point out, and I think we did effectively, how inconsistent that is. And okay, you know, it's probably an impossibility to have a perfect system, but I think certainly, you know, we made it clear that it can be better. And Norway, that is, you know, they're fishing and catching the world's bounty of cod right now. I mean, it's something, and we have a graphic there. It's something like 1 million metric tons to like 2,000 that they're allowed in the Gulf of Maine. So, I mean, it's you know, it's exponential. But with all that volume, they're still able to have this very successful collaboration, you know, between fishermen, regulators, environmentalists, and how that came up. You know, I kept seeing Norway and researching it, doing my own research, but then we went to one of these conferences and we actually met a couple of Norwegians that were at the Institute of Marine Fisheries. So he's the guy that we feature, and it took us a couple of years to get there. It was, you know, bare bones budgeting, like making this whole film was. It was 2 of us. You know, we had a successful Kickstarter campaign. It was myself and a DP, and, you know, 20 different Pelican cases, and we flew over there. We went to Iceland, and we went to Norway, and the Iceland piece was fantastic, but ultimately we didn't include it in the film. It was another sort of solution that we wanted to look at. And they're doing some great work there. A guy by the name of Thor Sigmason in Iceland with taking a lot of the byproducts of the codfish and creating new industries. It's called the Ice and Ocean Cluster. He's having a lot of success here. But, you know, we had a few days in Norway, and you know, we went to 3 different spots, and we were able to get into a fishery meeting, and we were able to talk to the folks at the IMF. And I think, you know, these are the guys that are in charge of Norwegian regulations and really could speak to how well their collaboration's been. And it comes down to as simple as they're including, you know, just what Valentine was talking about, and Richard, and what you're pointing about in terms of how that the lack of collaboration here was that these guys are spending their lives out in the sea. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense that you're not including their perspectives when it comes to the science. There's more than the data that they collect. It has value. And so I think the Norwegians recognize that. And of course, they have a lot more success in the fishery because of that, because of the transparency.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you're quite clear in the film that one of the biggest issues is the consumer. The consumer is used to having whatever it's the 5 kinds of fish that
Yeah.
is 85% of what U.S. consumers eat. Talk to us a little bit about the time you spent with the chefs and that perspective on what and what you think is I guess possible about trying to adjust the palate of the American consumer to create a more sustainable sort of industry for long term.
Yeah, well, these guys have a big platform, right? I mean, and we picked no small chefs, and just from a producing standpoint, it was a pecking order. We worked our way. I didn't just call up Eric Repair one day and said, "Hey, but we worked our way up to those chefs and began to build credibility. I mean, there's sort of the filmmaking side of it. There's so many different pieces, but that was one piece that we were kind of working our way into that world. And the higher you get up, but we really wanted to feature, these bigger celebrity chefs, if you will, because they do have such a platform and they have a big influence. And, there's a lot of interest in the culinary world and, TV and entertainment today. So people are consuming a lot of that. But yeah, their influence, and then, with social media, and again, I think Valentine can speak to some of this, as an influencer herself, to how these can begin to shape the average consumer's perspective on seafood. I really do think it's when we're visual creatures, and when you see something, and you can see a lot of the fish that Valentine's catching that I would personally love to try that I've never even seen before, but looks delicious, that I believe that people are willing to try things that they haven't tried, but they're just intimidated from it, and I think, again, I'll kick it over to Valentine because I think she can speak well to this, which is, we talk about, available species and some of these alternative species that Richard would have a hard time selling, finding a market for. She's finding fish, like I said, I've never even seen before, and she, taking away I think the important thing is taking away some of the intimidation factors that people feel as consumers about fish. We want to get a fillet, we want to cook it, and that's it, and we feel comfortable with cooking a couple kinds of fish, but if it's a monkfish and there's a little bit of work to do, then, so I think that's where we need to go with that. And I think, so Valentine, please include your perspective on that, because it's valuable.
Well, I think that, so basically since the early 2000s, the market really kind of believes that focusing on the consumer side of thing is not efficient. So they basically think that everything that is educating consumer is not a good way to actually make changes. And those studies would all the way to maybe 2007, 2010. And I do strongly believe that actually things are shifting. And especially now with social media and different movements being created, it is very important to be able to target and to educate the public, especially when we live in a world with, sadly, the fishing industry, especially on a higher level, it's definitely driven by profits and bigger boats, and there's a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of shaming agents around just trying to influence the market, and it's not. It has to be focused a little bit more on what we're doing, because at the end of the day, again, the sustainability is about making the right compromises, as much on the consumer side of things as on the fishing side of things. So it's, yeah, at the end of the day, it's whatever the choices people make. We just need to balance personal preferences, availability, the social side of it, and fishermen like Richard, to be able to sustain and just public policy that the government decides to install. So it's a tough questions, and sadly there's no black and white answer, and it's just about finding about what people care about. And I do believe that if we make a very strong effort to reach the public about different things and really create that strong proximity between them and the ocean, then this is what's going to make people start to care. And right now it's just not happening. Like Darby, you're saying, people just want to buy a piece of fish and cook it and just don't be bothered about what's behind it. But those things are changing, and sadly or happily actually, with the power of social media and again movements, I think that we can make a strong difference. And actually, because at the end of the day, the consumer is driving the market. So we can say as much as we want that it's not, but it's actually at the end of the day what's happening. So
there's, I think, just real quick, there's an access issue there too, because I think that, like Richard could, he might pull up the majority of dogfish, and that could have value. It just depends on the market you're talking about. In Europe, it does. We talk about that. But, there are successful examples, right? Patagonian toothfish became Chilean sea bass. Everybody loves it. It's a high value fish now. We use Julia Childs in there to talk about monkfish success. I think people just don't realize that there are so many good fish to eat in the ocean that they've never even heard of. And it kind of makes sense. You would think like, I never even knew it was out there. How come I could never buy it? But they don't realize all of the supply chain challenges that it would be for Richard to catch, some of these alternative species and then, have no market for it. So Richard, maybe you could just talk about some of those, challenges with some of those fish, like dogfish or something else.
Yeah, actually the dogfish have left our area. We have no idea why. No one can catch one. They're way down off of Cape Cod. But right here now, the haddock have basically taken over. And, we're coming into pollock season.
in New York.
Yeah, like I say, everybody's trying to stay away from codfish the best they possibly can, because that's just going to destroy us. But right now, I think the mainstay of the groundfish fishery is the haddock and monkfish. And a haddock they're not the giant haddock you get out of Iceland. They're a smaller 19, 20-inch version haddock, a smaller fillet. And they're pretty reasonable in the market right now here at the market basket of Shaw's or whatever. And people really should look into that. The Gloucester, Boston, Portland, Maine, small haddock fillets. They're fantastic.
And what is local is great. I mean, when I was living in coastal New Hampshire, I would get, when I could get local, it would just be whatever they had, right? The same sort of vision that Dr. Dish has. And it would be hake and pollock, always unbelievable. And they were, it's another groundfish. It's a great white fish. And they were, it's three times as less, or at least half the price of.
Right. Exactly. We have the hake, the pollock, haddock, all different kind of flounder species, gray sole, dabs, which is a beautiful fish, yellowtail flounder, blackback flounder. There's 5 or 6 different species of flounders that are being landed here daily that are just wonderful, beautiful fish.
So back full circle, your question is the chefs are the ones that are able to introduce these species and hopefully have the biggest impact as sort of the gatekeepers on that.
Do you think, is there a way to not go around the chefs? Because obviously they, like you said, that they're influencers of the palate in a certain way. But I go to a grocery store or wherever, a fish market, and I'm gonna be able to choose the stuff that's there. Are there ways that you would suggest or recommend that getting more of these directly to the consumer in terms of getting the consumer excited about it versus having to go to a restaurant and trying it first?
Or if you want to take up free diving and go, with Valentine sometime and dive 70 feet to get your own fish, then that's an alternative too. But most of us, it's, I think, some of the vehicles I think that could have an impact would be just technology. There are a lot of these community supported fisheries that, if you look them up, you can find them that will ship you, just fresh off the boat fish, and you might have to pay a little bit more. And I think that's the other thing, is that, putting a proper value on fresh seafood is something I think that we've been a bit brainwashed with, because of what the global seafood trade, how they've sort of dumbed us down and brought the prices down so low because of cheap labor in Asia, so that we've become so accustomed to cheap fish, cheap shrimp, that we don't ask questions. We don't put the value on seafood that I think it properly deserves. So I think that's part of it, is just being realistic that, you know, like you would with certain cuts of meat, you're going to pay a little bit more. You're going to have to pay a little bit more for, you know, prime seafood. But technology is one avenue of more direct access to consumers.
Right. So would the consumer pay another $1 a pound for beautiful fresh fish right off the boat that day than the stuff that's sent to China and flash frozen wherever around the world, sent to China, thawed out, and the meat's doubled in size with the chemicals they put in, you know, and sent back here in this part of the world, and it's coming out of Portland, Maine. What are they? Portland and Ipswich, Mass. I can't say what companies they are, but you know, they're distributing this stuff all around New England for less money than the fresh stuff, and it's just all chemicals. It's sad.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for this. I did want to just sort of get updates on, especially with Darby and Richard, about what are your next projects, and Richard's just a little bit of how things are going and your future plans in the fishing industry.
I'm just, hey, I'll be 67 in a couple of weeks, and I'm just going to keep fishing. I'm just going to keep going. That's all.
Keep fishing and drinking rum. That's a life.
That's not bad.
And Beth and I are going to be grandparents soon. So.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. It's all good. We're just going to keep going. And if Darby wants to do something else, all he's got to do is call me.
I'm going to come
might take up fishing, you know.
I have to send him some lobsters. So from Massachusetts to Texas, it's going to be
yeah,
overnight air freight.
I've got a couple kids been begging me every day for that. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No problem.
So, well, for me, you know, it's been a long project. Like I said, 6 or 7 years from, you know, to get to where we are now. Hopefully, the next one isn't. I did start on another feature doc last year. You know, it's, again, you know, I'm juggling this with other projects. So, but in short, it's just a very different project. It's about a world-class musician that and composer, pianist, and sort of inspirational speaker that has been going into prisons and traversing the United States and going into prisons on this sort of Concert for Hope tour. So it's an interesting, sort of more of like a character study on this guy and his own personal challenges and what drives him and motivates him to do this, to sort of reach this, you know, this population of people and having a real impact. I mean, he's played for a lot of famous people, but he's really devoted his life to this cause. So that's a project that I'm working on right now.
Does he eat fish?
Oh yeah, absolutely he does. Yeah.
Very good.
And Valentine, where can we look for your next projects or your upcoming things?
Well, I actually just we're setting up an oyster farm in Long Island, New York. So I'm going to keep working on that and try to do my share in the sustainable seafood part. And then, yeah, different other things that are completely irrelevant. So I'm not going to bore you with them, but fishing where it's at.
Excellent. Great.
And also,
could be one of the next projects too. So.
I'm going to go fishing with Richard also. That's definitely my project.
Yeah.
I'll bring him up.
Come up anytime. Just wait till the weather gets warmer.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, the three of you. It's been a pleasure, and Darby, thanks for this again. It's an important film. It's a thought-provoking film, and I'm very glad we're able to share it with our audiences here. So
Appreciate it. Thanks again for having us. Yeah.
And thanks to our audience for watching.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Guys.
Yeah. Bye-bye.